This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and/or Yoel.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast,
the podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce
to inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
Welcome back to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. You can find us on toodadtoquit.com, toodadtoquit on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We have a YouTube clips channel, and we want to share your story. We want you to be able to share your story. You have a lot of wisdom in your story, and any story can definitely help our audience, even though you may not think so yourself. Please make sure to rate the podcast, review the podcast, and share the podcast. We want to get our message out to as many people as possible. This week, we're sitting with Yitzchak Jaffe, who went on a soul-searching journey after a major incident in his life that I don't think he's ever shared publicly. And we got into some very interesting topics, and he's one of those seekers. He was looking for something, and he dug right in and kept searching till he found it. Along the way, he did fall into a divorce. But now he is happily remarried, and he was just a lot of insight, a lot of little nuggets of wisdom from his journeys around the globe. And I really think there's a lot here to listen to and learn.
Yeah, and of course, those nuggets are contained in a book that we are going to link our audience to, so you can get yourself a copy. Yitzchak is a very articulate, introspective type of person. You can see he's a deep thinker, and some very unique perspectives on things. I enjoyed what he said with respect to dating, about taking one's time, learning about oneself, being okay with being on one's own, and not rushing into things. So, like you said, Ben, he's got a lot of interesting insights, and I think our audience is going to love it.
Yeah, and stick around to the end, because he's got amazing stories of how he bonded with his son after traveling around the world and after putting his life on hold. So enjoy. This week, we are chatting with Yitzchak Jaffe. Yitzchak is currently 4 years into his second marriage. He has 4 kids from his previous marriage. Despite being remarried, being divorced is an enormous part of his identity. Yitzchak is currently in between jobs, hopefully not much longer. And in the meantime, he keeps himself busy with health and fitness, reading, learning languages, writing, editing, watching MMA, and a whole lot more. He is also the author of several books, including You're Doing Everything Wrong: Dating, Marriage, and Divorce. Advice from the Deep Within the Trenches. So, welcome, Yitzchak. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Welcome,
guys.
Just looking at your bio, you've definitely taken a long road with many turns, and I'd love to get kind of into that with you. You started, where did you grow up? Where were you born?
Sure. I'm from Staten Island, New York, but I thankfully do not have an accent, and I'm from New York, but I'm friendly.
Nice.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm a New Yorker in my heart, but I've been out of New York for pretty much my entire adult life. Yeah.
Where did you go after Staten Island?
I went to college in Albany, and for my final year of university, I actually came to Israel, and I came for a year, and I stayed for a total of 8. That was my first Aliyah.
Wow.
Got it.
Nice. Wait, so how old are you, if I can ask you? I'm curious if because one of my closest friends grew up in Staten Island. Are we the same vintage? I'm 43.
I'm 45.
So you came to Israel for 1 year, and you liked it. You met somebody. What were you doing here that got you stuck here?
So stuck. It's a funny choice of words. So I came. Well, it's a complicated story, but I became a Baal Tshuva. I got involved in Orthodox Judaism when I was in college. Before that, I was in avid member of the Reform movement, and I came to actually went to university with the intention of becoming a Reform rabbi after I left university. And a bunch of things happened, and next thing I know, I'm in a Chabad house, and by the end of the summer, I'm keeping Shabbat, and people are telling me I'm no longer Reform. So I went on a massive journey to try and figure out who I actually was, and that journey led me to Israel. My goal was to go to yeshiva, whatever that meant. And the place to do that seemed to be Israel, which is why I chose Bar-Ilan University. I thought that Bar-Ilan University was supposed to be this middle ground between university and yeshiva. I wouldn't call it that. That's definitely what the program is on paper, but it wasn't what I was looking for. I wasn't yet where I belonged. But that ended up leading me from place to place. First ended up in yeshiva across the street in Bnei Brak. And after that, I moved to Yerushalayim. I went to Or Sameach. And by then I was in love with the country. I made Aliyah, and everything just flowed naturally from there.
I just want to stop you for a second to kind of give our audience who's not familiar with all of these terms and lingos.
Sorry,
Can
audience.
you kind of do like a 2-minute summary of like Reform Judaism and then Orthodox Judaism, and then whatever you experienced across the street from college that was probably a much more extreme Judaism?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not so well read on who the audience is and isn't. So please feel free to.
No problem.
Happy to define everything. So Judaism split into several movements at one point in history, and one of them was the Reform movement. And I'm just gonna throw things out as if they're facts, but they might be close to facts.
Our fact checkers will check it after.
Great.
Ben.
About 16th century, a big split away from Judaism. That's a bad way of phrasing it, but a split away from mainstream orthodoxy to essentially to save Judaism by making it a little bit more similar to what was going on around them. So Jews could essentially be Jewish, but also be like everybody else. And that movement took off in certain places and really took off in America. So I did not grow up in a religious family at all. We were, I guess you could say, basic secular. So when I was 15, I got very, very involved accidentally with the Reform movement when someone invited me to come to a meeting just the right time, and I quickly became obsessed. It was my life for years. Let's see, what was the next thing to define?
Orthodox Judaism.
Orthodox Judaism. So Orthodox Judaism is a little bit more about the letter of the law, doing various practices daily, whether it be keeping kosher or observing the Sabbath or praying 3 times a day. And the traditions go back for thousands of years. And when I discovered this type of Judaism, I really got intrigued quickly because, ironically, because of the Reform movement. It's a strange little piece of the story that a few people understand from the inside, but what Reform Judaism taught me was that Judaism is like a menu, right? You have all of these different choices of things you can do, and you pick and choose what's meaningful to you. And I kind of went to that menu, and everything I was exposed to, it was like a buffet to me. I wanted it all. I wanted everything, and I just kept on taking things. And then people from the Reform movement told me that I was no longer Reform. I was Orthodox now, and I was terribly confused. And in some ways, even though it's more than 2 decades later, I'm still a little confused, trying to figure out what they meant if they didn't mean that I could choose everything. But yeah, so the best way, I was behind at this point in my life because there were 3-year-old kids going to this Chabad house who knew significantly more than I did, and it was embarrassing. It was motivating, but it was also embarrassing, and I needed to fill in a lot of gaps. So the best place I thought to do that was Israel, in what are called yeshivas, which are schools of studying Judaism, essentially all day, every day, just sitting with books in Hebrew or Aramaic and just poring over them, often with a partner or by yourself, or in a class. And that's what I wanted. I wanted as much of that as possible to fill in the gaps and try and get myself to to the next level as soon as possible. And the place I ended up, Bnei Brak, is it's a very interesting community. It is wall to wall ultra-orthodox. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and I stood out like a sore thumb, but it didn't bother me at all. They were super friendly to me. I mean, they were as kind can be for the duration of my stay there. I don't have a bad thing to say about the place, except it was too hot.
Right.
Oh my God, it was so hot. It was so hot. I was there for a 3-day heat wave at one point where it didn't break at night.
Wow.
3 straight days of brutal, oppressive heat. But it was formative for me in my learning, formative for me in my exposure to different types of Judaism, and just really trying to figure out who I am and what I want, what I want from this Jewish world.
And what was your family reaction to all of this change that was going on?
Yeah, that was my question.
That's been a good one. Yeah, I would say they were happy that I was happy, but would have preferred a more traditional American path. The finish university, either go from there to a higher degree or get into the workforce, get a salary, settle down at some point, not in a place that's an entire ocean away from them, and with threats of terrorism and missile strikes. And yeah, so I think it was a lot for them, and in many ways it's still a lot for them. But I think they've come to terms with it for the most part.
Do you think they got to a point where they were like, all right, he's doing this, like, that's it? They're in the beginning it was like, maybe, I don't know, but like, it's been X amount of years where
I mean,
he's in.
How could they not? You can't be hoping for a different. I mean, since then I have had a career and gotten a higher degree, so I guess in some ways I did it in a roundabout way. Gave them $4,000,
but it was mainly professional that they were worried about, not like the religious part.
The religious part was definitely a challenge. I mean, my mom grew up with a certain amount of tradition in the household. My dad did not. I think in many ways he would have been more happy had I married not Jewish than had I married Orthodox. So I can't say that for a fact. That's if you want to interview him, feel free. He's also a dad, an exceptional one at that, in my opinion, and a granddad and a great granddad. But yeah, I mean, it was a struggle. It was a struggle, like it is for so many. But my parents are fantastic human beings, and a bit of part of my story along the way was discovering that much, before reform movement, before everything. And I can only imagine that me being safe and happy is far more important than me having a career or making a lot of money. I think they want the best for their kids. So not everybody defines that the same way, but definitely want my happiness, my serenity, and if that takes me to Israel, then so be it.
Hmm.
You know,
You
you
have
described
you have
that
siblings,
moment.
by the way. Sorry, Ben. You have siblings also, or is it just
Yeah,
you?
two
Yeah,
siblings,
and they're still in the States. They're still in the U.S. Okay,
right? Older
all right,
siblings.
got it. Okay.
You described that moment where you figured out that they were good parents. Is that like an epiphany moment? Like these aren't the parents telling me what to do, and I got to listen to them. Oh my gosh, they're like people that I need to respect because they're just great. Like I'm looking at my friends, and these parents are so much better. You know.
So, it really. I'll tell the story. It's an awful story, but it's everything in my life in many ways. It's the starting point of who I am. Is I was going down let's say not a great path in Staten Island. It's an easy thing to do in Staten Island. And
Mhm.
I was hanging out with a bad crowd, doing things I shouldn't do. I was 15 at the time, by the way, and I but 15-year-olds are stupid. There's no other way to say it. Teenagers, they make ridiculous decisions, and you can tell them all day long what to do, what not to do. They're going to make mistakes, and mine was a doozy and cost me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I went with a bunch of friends, or I guess people at the time who I perceived as friends, to a party where I proceeded to get very drunk, and a large group of people came to start trouble with the party, and they um, they it looked like a fight was going to happen, and I was not a fighter, and I was quite tipsy. So I decided to try and walk away from the whole thing. I was not in a neighborhood I recognized. I was nowhere near anything that I could, any place to escape to. But I thought if I walked away, everything would be okay. And I could not have been more incorrect. I was followed by a group of 6 kids who then proceeded to beat the ever living heck out of me while I was
Wow.
walking down it was houses. It was just a normal suburban neighborhood with houses on both sides, and 6 people following me down the street beating me up. And
Wow.
yeah, they did this relentlessly for a long period until somebody came outside and yelled and brought me into their home. And they called my parents, who then came and took me to the emergency room, and where I had a gigantic gash in my hand that got all stitched up. And you know that you guys are both parents. I'm sure you've given, I don't know how old your kids are, but depending on how old they are, I'm sure you've given them certain speeches about who you are to them. The speech about if you can go to something late at night, but if the choice is calling me at 2 a.m, exposing that you lied to me about your whereabouts, and the other choice is getting in the car with somebody who's just drank, I come to pick you up, no questions asked, and that's the end of the story. Your safety is what's important to me. My parents uh, picked me up, took me to the emergency room, brought me home, gave me all the care any parent could possibly ever give for a child, whether it be the physical stuff or the psychological stuff, because there was a heck of a lot of that to follow the incident. And they never mentioned it.
Wow.
I lied to them about where I was supposed to be. I I was doing so many things I should not have been doing. I was a 15-year-old getting drunk in a field with a bunch of punks, and they never said a word about it to me. They just let me figure out for myself what what I did wrong, what I should do next, what I shouldn't do next. And I'm forever grateful. I mentioned earlier that a friend invited me to a youth group meeting. That's how I discovered the Reform movement. That was shortly after this incident. That was, I was in this zone of, I need to change something in my life, because if I don't, this is going to happen again. But, not everybody has that moment they could point to where they could say,
Yeah.
oh my God, my parents are fantastic human beings. And I've never forgotten, I never will forget everything from that day. That was 30 years ago.
Wow. Wow. Well, we're glad you made it out, and I'm that I hear a lot of people that call me for help and things now that we're involved in the podcast, and I hear like these things about parents that are not like that, and that these people are missing a piece of them because they don't have that thing that your parents gave you. And it's so nice to hear, and for you to consciously be aware of it, it even has an even bigger impact. So thank you for sharing that. So you were here for 7 years, and then you left the country.
I was 8 years. 8 years. And then by the time those 8 years had finished, I was married with one child, and I went on shlichut. Shlichut is basically an agreed upon system where, after doing some type of study, you then go out to another place outside of Israel for a few years to teach the rest of the world about Israel.
Well, that was part of Chabad. So you were part of Chabad? You were
not Chabad. It was actually a bunch of different programs, none of which were Chabad.
Really?
I went to a yeshiva. My last 3 years in Israel, I went to Yeshivat Hamivtar.
Okay.
And did these practical rabbi training programs.
Right.
So these programs all had requirements for how long you had to be out of the country. And to be honest, the time had come. I did my 8 years. They were hard. They were extremely, extremely, extremely hard. I definitely learned that Israel is a fantastic, fantastic place to have absolutely no responsibilities.
Well said.
Yeah. Once those responsibilities start setting in, you start seeing a couple of the flaws, a couple of the flies in the ointment, and I saw all of them. No, that's not true. I saw a lot of them. There's still more that I keep discovering, but I left ready to leave. I did think that I'd be back in 1 to 2 years. I was gone for 11.
Wow.
Yeah. And I got stuck, but in a good way. I was very, very content with where I was living when I moved back, which is a whole other story. But yeah, stayed for 8,
Okay.
11.
And that's how you started your teaching career.
Yeah. I started off at doing let's call it outreach or informal education at a university at Cornell. And after that, I wanted to try something a little different. I wanted to not have to advertise for my classes and try and get people to come. I wanted kids to be forced to be there. So I moved on to Baltimore, and that's where my 9 years as a teacher began.
Got it. Okay. So you did that for 9 years. You were in Baltimore, and how did you get back here? How did you get back to Israel?
Okay, so that's a big thing, a big story. Where do I start? Well, okay, so I mentioned that when I left for America, I was married with a child. By the time I'd come back to Israel, I was divorced with 4 children. After Baltimore, my wife and I, we moved to Kansas City, which is that's where her family's from, and there were a lot of reasons for the move. We're trying out different things in life, trying to be a little bit closer to her family, and but the marriage just collapsed. It came to its natural conclusion at some point during that time, and then I thought we were going to be in Kansas for who knows how long. I found a great apartment, found a decent job. I was in a new part of my career. That's right. I said 4 kids. I didn't mention the dog. Apologize for that. He'll get upset. So yeah, after a maybe 6 months divorced, I don't remember the timeline well at all. I try to, but it's such a blur to me. But
such a blur,
yeah. Maybe 6 months after the divorce, she contacts me and says she wants to pick up and move to Israel.
Huh.
And I was not at all on board for many, many reasons. One is I was in the process of a career switch. I was done with education and trying to move on to bigger and better things for me. And not to disparage the entire field of education, although it is not for everyone. But I was ready to move on, and divorce is rough on so many levels. But one of them was financially. I had next to nothing, and you cannot move to Israel with nothing in your bank.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have much career prospects yet, and coming to Israel without a plan is also not a great idea. So the real question was what to do next, and I was still messed up a little bit from an inappropriate marriage can do its number on just about anyone. And I didn't know how to react. I had my older 2 kids were calling me daily, begging. Oh, for those who are unaware, you are not allowed to move your children to another country without the other parent's permission. That's not legal. So in order for this to happen, I'd have to agree to either go also or agree to let them go. And so I had to decide: do I go with them and face whatever crazy consequences that would cost me, to let them go and stay behind, or to block them from leaving? So I had my 2 older kids calling me every single day, begging me to let them go. And
how old were they at the time?
Oh, that is an excellent question. I guess they were 12 and 8 approximately, although I've already mentioned that I'm not great at timelines. Maybe a little bit younger than that. And yeah, just daily phone calls, really putting on the pressure.
Why? Why do they, just for idealistic reasons to return to Israel, or like, was it ever explained to you like why they wanted to all of a sudden come back to Israel?
I mean, the best I could do is, one of the things we learn in educating children is the interpretation they accept usually is the first one they hear. So it's just I mean, I think it works that way for adults most of the time too, but for kids especially. And the schooling that they had doesn't teach Israel's complications. It teaches that it's this oasis where you live your life on the beach, and you drink tahina, and just it's this wonderful homeland for the Jewish people where we're safe and sound and with people who love us. And they didn't know anything about the challenges. And since the schools and others had gotten to them first, there was no telling them different. I couldn't say, well, just so you know, you're very unlikely to see your grandparents very often. If we go to, and by the time that 11 years were up, we had owned a house, sold a house, bought another house in another city. So like you get really stuck in America. The trappings of the life there are are fantastic. The home that I owned in Kansas is a pipe dream in Israel. And yet I probably paid less for that house than this easily than what
Easily.
this apartment would cost. And this is, just a 3-bedroom thing that sucks in noise and cigarette smoke from outside. So, so no, it's a decent apartment. Don't get me wrong, but it's as good as it could be.
Yeah.
So the final decision after I succumbed to the pressure was I would stay in America for one more year, and then I would move back to Israel and to be with my kids, and that was it. So I have a very strange Aliyah story, because most people's stories involve some type of head in the clouds, excitement. I'd already done that. I came here as a starry-eyed 20-year-old and did that whole I love this experience. But then so many things happened that made me wary of a return. And I'd gotten really settled and comfortable in the States, but my kids are more important than all of that. So even though I found an apartment that I loved, and a community that I loved, and a city that I loved, and my career was moving in a good direction, I had to get back to my kids. And just so for the fun of the story, I moved actually on. This is a date that's easy to put a timeline on, because I moved the day Donald Trump got elected president.
Nice.
Yeah. So what is that? November 8th?
January. Oh, election day.
Election day.
Yeah. Sounds right.
And my son moved in with me the very next day.
Wow.
And he's been living with me ever since. So he is now 19, studying electrical engineering at Tel Aviv University, electrical engineering and physics. You'd get mad at me if I didn't include both. And yeah, he's one of my best friends in this world.
It's amazing.
Are your kids happy that they're here? Like, were they happy with the move?
Well, yeah, they've gone in stages along the way. I think now they've all been here. I think all of them have been here the majority of their lives. And even though my son came here, he was born here and lived here for a couple of years. He got here when he was 12, which is a very, very challenging year to move to Israel. And without getting into a lot of the details, it wasn't by mistake that he moved in with me. There was his first year in Israel was super challenging. It was good for our relationship. During the time when things were super challenging, he would call me and we'd speak for hours, and he visited me and had one of the most amazing times together when he came. But ups and downs. There are things I think that the two young ones were too young to really remember the States. So, not that their opinion about living here is invalid, but this is the country they know better.
Right.
And my other two, I think they kind of waver back and forth. My son is in a nearly decade-long program with starting with university, followed by nearly 6 years in the Army. So, even if he isn't fully satisfied here and wants to be back in the States, he understands that this is where he is for the time being. We'll see what happens after that. But they got used to stuff. Now my daughter's finally in a bit of a groove. She's going to the beach that she was so excited about going to. Call me, begging to come to Israel. So yeah, no beach in Kansas City.
We're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Took too long to get to that one, I think.
I know it was so obvious. It was so obvious. Somebody had to do it.
It is the dad podcast.
Got to make a. It has to be some Dorothy joke or something next, But those are the standard ones.
Yeah.
So okay, so you've been here for a while, and then now you met someone, and you're remarried. How was that process for you of getting ready to meet somebody? Was it happenstance?
It was bumpy. It was very, very, very bumpy. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm used to talking to people and not thinking, wait, other people could hear this. So weighing so many things carefully. When I was living in Kansas, I was not dating. Besides the fact that I was by no means ready, I was in Kansas. the observant Jewish population of single eligible females within some type of normal age range was basically non-existent. So I didn't even think about it. And then I got here, and it didn't matter whether or not I thought about it. Maybe you guys have had this with yourselves or friends, but in a city like Jerusalem, being single is not an option to most of the people around you. They look at you as a broken toy that needs to be fixed, a project that everybody needs to work on. And I felt like, I was a 39-year-old or 38-year-old employed thin guy who, like everybody and their sister, wanted to set me up with somebody. So I went on a few dates, and without getting into the thick of things, I think I went out with 4 different people, 4 different girls, and my head was not there. It was not enhancing my life. I'll put it that way. If you had, when I was dating the first time around before my first marriage, I think it was all I was thinking about, day in, day out. When is the next date gonna be? And here I was. I think if you had asked me 10 minutes after one of the dates, where are you coming from, I would have had to have thought about it. Like, oh yeah, I guess I was on a date. My head was not there. So I made a very, very conscious decision to stop. I decided to take a year off, and I stuck to my guns. Anybody asked me if I was interested in dating, I said, no, not for at least a year. And I stuck to it. I stuck to it well. I needed that time. I needed to find myself. I needed to learn to love being single, to learn to love being a single dad living in first Nachlaot and then Baca with a teenage son and a dog, and figure out my life this way. So the year ended, and I didn't really have any interest in dating. I was in the flow. I was happy. I was content. This was the life for me. And people, but I changed my policy. It went from I'm not dating to I'll only go out with the person you're suggesting on 2 conditions. And I want you to keep in mind, many, 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 many people reached out to me trying to set me up with people. And I said, condition number 1 is you know us both well. And condition number 2 is you have a real reason why you think we would be good together. Literally 100% of people dropped the topic after I said those 2 conditions.
That's funny.
That was it. It was like, oh, you're single. Oh, it's match made in heaven.
How did you know so many people? Like, you just met friends very quickly and easily, or like, who are all these people that were,
Hey, it's been a long road. There are people from my college days, before my college days, the yeshiva days, Bnei Brak, Jerusalem, Karmate Sor, another place I lived along the way. state places, people from that I knew from America, and just people I met, as the years go by, you build this laundry list of wonderful connections,
Right.
some of whom are close and some of whom are just people
Right.
But yeah, a lot of people tried, and I wasn't. No, I did that. I did the whole I'll just go out because somebody's setting me up thing, and that was not a good system for me. So I was only willing to go out if something seemed right, and they had real reasons why they thought it was. I mean, so somebody very well intentioned, but someone even went so far as to try and set me up with somebody living in New York, and I was like, I mean, what do you want me to do? Like, spend thousands of dollars to fly to New York to go on a date? I don't even leave my neighborhood. So yeah, so I was that was all going fine and good, and then I sat next to somebody at a Shabbat table. It wasn't a singles meal. It wasn't anything at all to do with dating. I just sat next to someone, and and things just flowed from there. I mean, there's a whole big story of what happened next, and I've always wanted to tell this story with two screens side by side, where Dvorah, my wife, tells the story and where I tell the story. You'll get very, very, very different perspectives on what happened from there. But long story short, very long story, very short. We eventually started talking, and then eventually started dating, and things just flowed naturally from there.
Wow.
Which is the better way in my mind. I work on yourself, just live life, and keep yourself out there, meet great people, and good things will either flow, or you'll be too happy and content and busy to even realize that they didn't go in the direction you were expecting them to.
Wow. Well said. Was she married before as well, or?
This is all the props in the world to my lovely wife. She took on 4 stepchildren,
Wow.
And a dog.
and a dog, and a somewhat damaged husband, and yeah, we're trying to make it all work.
And I forgot from the intro. Sorry to ask. You have more children as well with her?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. I didn't remember what Ben had said at the intro, but that's beautiful. Wow. So that's really. So how long ago was this that you met her?
That we met, it was 5 years ago. Got married about 4.5 years ago.
Beautiful. So nice.
Yeah.
It's actually, it reminds me of something I read recently, but basically when a person goes to date, they need to be happy alone
With
first.
themselves. Yeah.
Because if you're not happy alone, then you can't demand what you need from that relationship because you have a fear of being alone.
That's a beautiful way to say it. I say many similar things, that a lot of people present marriage as two halves creating a whole, and I think it's an awful perspective. I'm very, very, very opposed to that perspective. I think two halves that come together to create a whole do not create a whole. They're just two people who haven't figured it out yet, leaning on another person, hoping that things flow from there. And we, the divorced folk of the world, know that marriage in and of itself is by no means a panacea for the troubles that we're having in life. It doesn't fix anything. You could be happy single and miserable divorced, and you could be lonely married. So I think that things work better when two whole individuals, two independent, strong people get together and form a relationship. That's when something magical can happen. That's when they create something that's better than either of them separately.
So you also write, I guess, with your spare time, and you've written 2-3 books?
4.
4. Okay,
Wow.
awesome.
4 books.
But you have one in particular that really piqued my interest, with a longer name than I'm going to remember right now.
Don't worry about it.
So feel free to, tell us about the book and why you wrote the book and kind of like the key takeaways from the book.
Sure. So, well, I mean, the main thing is I love to write. Writing is my way of processing the world. I said I have a blog also, and I blog weekly. I'm nearing up on 300 posts, and it's really just it's me talking, it's me emoting, getting my thoughts and feelings out of my system into the world. And there were a few topics where I had a lot more to say, and this was one of them. After having my dating experiences, after having my marriage experience, and after having my divorce experience, I thought I needed to consolidate what I had learned along the way and put them into writing to really get my thoughts down on paper and hope that people out there will benefit. Now, the book is called "You're Doing Everything Wrong," and one of the reasons why it's called that is, I mean, it's more than anything, it's a message to my previous self, because I did it. And I say it in the intro to the book. I made these mistakes, so hopefully you don't have to. And we said earlier that people, kids especially, they make mistakes, and they'll probably make them no matter what we say or what we do. But hopefully my kids will not be in a park in the middle of the night drunk and getting attacked by a bunch of people because they'll have listened to the awful story I tell them. And it's the same thing here. Hopefully somebody will read this and be like, that actually makes a lot of sense. I should date this way and not date this way, and I should focus on that aspect of my marriage and not this aspect. And especially now, I've unfortunately, there's this generation of friends now who are getting divorced, and I feel like I'm just being a step or two ahead of them gives me a lot of opportunity to help guide them, because it's you fall into these patterns, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. So if they don't have, and their families might not, everybody has a loving family. Everybody has people to cry to talk
Hopefully.
to, but not, well, yeah, okay, that's true too. Yeah, hopefully. But not everybody has somebody who's been in their shoes who can help assure them that there is a brighter time coming, or to guide them and push them in a direction to help them understand how to get there quicker, or how to get there. It doesn't have to be quick. In fact, sometimes guiding them is telling them to slow the heck down. I see people seriously dating months after they get divorced, and I want to just sit them down and be like, you did that once. You tried that. It how did it work out? It didn't. It wasn't such a good thing. You want to take your time, and I know statistically we second married folk are doomed, but it's just an unfortunate statistic. But I mean, everyone's doomed if you go by statistics. But 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 the second marriage folk, I feel like for ourselves, for our children, we can't be doomed. We have to do things better. We have to make, and the first step to doing things better is a better start, not making mistakes that you'll regret later on in the early stages of dating and marriage. So, it all comes together in this book of, I don't even want to call it wisdom. I'm very humble, I hope, about what the book is and what the book isn't. I recognize the irony in telling people how to date and how to get married or how to be married when you're a divorcee. But I actually finish the book, spoiler, by talking about not identifying anymore as a divorcee, at least in the respect that there's something wrong with you as a divorcee. I think a lot of people have that stigma is still there, like you're divorced. What happened? But I look at it as a badge of honor. I learned things that other people haven't, And I now can share that with other people. I now could help other people who need to know what I know and need to learn from my mistakes and need to help getting from point A to point B.
Wow, that's beautifully said. Can you, not to give away the whole book, because I'm sure we'll link to it in our description wherever we link things. How people could buy a copy of the book. But just to give some like a bit of a sneak peek into some of those, like, let's say, mistakes, or even about what you were talking about dating before. Can you give us some samples?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the biggest things that I talk about, I'm actually now confusing myself a little bit. I don't remember if I talk about it as much in the book or in one of my blog posts, but we talk about decision making in the early stages. That it's very easy. I'm the type of person who gets my head wrapped into things quickly. So I went on a lot of bad dates. The vast majority of the dates I went on were awful, like awful dates. And then I went on a couple that were great. And that geared me toward automatically getting my head wrapped up in this idea of, oh my God, I met the one finally. I've watched half my friends get married, have these great, wonderful, amazing weddings. And now it's going to be my turn because I met that person. And then once you're in that zone, there's no turning back. There's no, everybody is just, no one could slow you down. No one can get your head out of it. And before you know it, you're engaged. Before you know it, you're married. And then at that point, it's just inertia and fear holding you back from moving out of a marriage that you're uncomfortable in. So there's a lot of talk about that. I have a theory. I can't prove it. I've only spoken to the divorced people I've spoken to, but I like to ask sometimes. People ask me all the time, when did you know? When did you know something was wrong? And I think that most divorcees don't even talk about it because we kind of all like, I think there's almost a wink, wink, nudge, nudge with one another, as we all know collectively, really, really early on is the answer to that question. Sometimes surprisingly early on. In my case, it was during the engagement.
Wow.
And I've heard people say under the chuppah, at their marriage canopy, that's when they knew that something was wrong. But the answer was never has been from anyone I've spoken to. It was 10, 11 years into the marriage. And then all of a sudden I realized that something was wrong. No, it was, everything was, they had this feeling in your gut that this isn't what you should be doing. And I think a lot of us train ourselves to ignore that feeling in place with some other type of logic getting in the way. And then when well-meaning people speak to us and say, maybe slow down, or maybe you should pay close attention to, this thing that happened or this thing that happened, you just ignore it all. You're in that little reverie. I'm so excited. So yeah, that's one of the big things that I want to impart along to people is to slow down, get a friend who you can rely upon. There's another thing from the book. This one is it's a big part of it is making sure that you have a second set of eyes, somebody in your life who you can truly rely upon, who you can lean on and say, this happened, what do you think? And the problem is, especially with people who don't do this the right way, is they're not going to listen to what anybody says. They're, like I mentioned, they're in this reverie. They're not going to listen to the advice of other people. They're not in that mindset. And to make it worse, the other people kind of know that. They know that they shouldn't say anything. They're afraid of ruining the friendship. They're afraid of speaking poorly to you about this person who you might end up being married to in a month. And you need to assure that person, and more importantly, yourself, that that you're not going to dump them as a friend. You're not going to, you might ignore them. That might happen. You might not follow their advice, but you're going to listen to them, and you're not going to judge them for what they said. You understand that they're doing it for you. So it's like, sit them down and say, please, if you just leave it to me, I'm going to mess things up on my own. I need your help. And I think we all need it. I think every single one of us need, some of us more than others, but I think everybody could benefit from a second set of eyes to help keep us a little bit more grounded and intelligent. I had that for the second time around. the two people, my two trusted people who I spoke to at length about who they were to me in this whole process.
Wow.
Well, I can't wait to get a hold of that book. We this being the Too Dad to Quit podcast, you shared a lot of wisdom here. Before we get into some more of your wisdom, we'd love for you to share your Too Dad to Quit moment, some moment where you were proudest as a dad, or when you think about it, you just like light up. That moment that plays over in your head when the kids are not behaving and not listening to you, and you're just like, oh man, don't worry, those moments are going to come back.
I mean, it's here. I'm gonna, if I may, say a couple of things that hopefully we'll get some points across. But I mean, one I've already mentioned, just getting on the plane and moving here when I did, and accepting my son, even though we didn't have furniture or a fridge or any way to cook our food. When he needed to be out of his situation that was damaging him, the door was wide open, as I always knew it would be. And I hope the 11, 12-year-old version of him appreciated how difficult that was to literally get off a plane and say, come on over. But I think that was a big one. I've had a lot of interesting wins with my son that I think he's a very capable and confident person now. And it wasn't always that way, especially when during that year was hard. It was extremely hard for him psychologically, and he suffered. But a handful of specific incidences, I think, helped put him back on this path. One of them was encouraging him to start studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think that I think martial arts, especially serious martial arts, if I could explain what the difference is between serious and not serious if you want, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is as serious as it gets, and he is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. It changed so much about him, the way he started carrying himself, just a little bit taller, smiling more, got in phenomenal shape, really helped him to recognize the importance of being healthy. And just different things like that, where we had adventures together. My son and I went skydiving twice.
Wow.
Both times as part of a fundraiser, which sadly is no longer in existence, for a lean hospital. So we were,
oh yeah, they're not in existence anymore.
A lean hospital is, sorry, I hope that was not.
It's like, what?
A lean hospital, going strong, amazing place. If you have to choose between buying my book and giving them a donation, give them a donation. They're phenomenal. They had 4 fundraisers every year, and now they have 3. They no longer are doing.
I actually almost did that one.
Oh, it would have been fun to meet you there.
Yeah.
It's
insurance problems, I guess. Eh?
No, lack of repeat interest, I think, was the main one. As it was explained to me, people do it, and sorry about that. People do it, and they don't want to do it a second time. or they don't feel that it's not like a race people run every single year in Jerusalem Marathon or whatever. But this is like people look at it as this once in a lifetime thing. And we obviously didn't. We did it twice, and the second time from higher up.
I heard that on like a YouTube short. You only need a one of the, what do they call it? The parachute. You only need a parachute to jump twice. You don't need a parachute to skydive once. I think it was worded differently, but it was an interesting twist on things. But anyway, yeah. So carry on.
No, it is. It's really, it's one of those things that you do where you kind of think to yourself afterwards, well, where do I go from here? I mean, I jumped out of a plane. Like there's nothing you can do in life that's more intense and intimidating than jumping out of a plane, at least on paper.
You got to ask Tom Cruise. He keeps coming up with stuff, I think. So he like rides motorcycles out of planes and parachutes off motorcycles and all sorts of
he does his own stunts, that nut job.
Yeah.
50s now, I think. At least.
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
But yeah, so we did that together twice, raised over $7,000 for Aline. And and something's different when you jump out of a plane. First of all, you show up in school in September or June or whenever September, and teachers love to go around and say, "What'd you do with your summer?" And most of the kids, I watched TV, nothing. I hung out with friends. The more exciting ones say they went to camp, and Shlomo gets to say he jumped out of a plane, and guess what? The conversation's over at that point because everything turns to you. No one cares about anybody else's. I took a walk. It's just not important anymore. But I think these things have just changed him. A whole slew of different things along those lines. Taking him shooting. I apologize to the folk who might be listening, who might be offended by the fact that I took my 12-year-old shooting. But it
is the Middle East.
What's that?
I said it is the Middle East. So.
Oh, we did it in Kansas.
Oh, whoops. Okay.
Middle America.
Here's a fun fact, right? You cannot take a 12-year-old skydiving in America, but you cannot take a 12-year-old shooting in Israel. So we managed to get the best of both worlds. The place in Kansas where I took him shooting, I asked if my younger kid could come. And they said, as long as they could hold a gun, they could come shooting. So welcome to the Midwest. Yeah. It's a different planet. So yeah, but these things, they change a kid. They give them confidence and strength and stories. Most kids are boring. Because why wouldn't they be boring? Most 20-year-olds are boring. What have they done? I went to classes. That's not fun. That's not exciting. But when you could provide your children with adventure and stories, you change everything.
Yeah, that amazing. And the last thing we like to leave our audience with is some tips or advice that you have for anybody who's thinking about going to divorce, going through divorce, coming out of divorce, stuck in that rut, as you said. You're coming from the front and you're ahead. So something that you would tell, I guess, even your previous self who was going through it.
Yeah, sure. I actually have a chapter in the book that's about when to go. There's one about when to reconcile, and there's one about when to go. And good thing I can't remember everything I wrote, because that's more incentive to buy the book. Yes. But there are specific things that are signs that you shouldn't be there, and there's a lot of mental gymnastics we play with ourselves. We stay for the wrong reasons, and I think it's just super important to really sit down and give it a lot of deep heartfelt thought. Are you happy? When you look at this person and you say, I love you, do you actually feel that? Or are you just going through the motions at this point? You haven't felt that in 5 years. You just are saying it because that's what married people say. If you look at these things and you say these, I think it was 5 things to look at. If you find yourself saying all 5 of these things, or 4 or 3 of these things, it's probably a sign to move on. If you've tried, most marriages owe it to themselves to try therapy. I even advocate for therapy for completely healthy, good quality couples, because everybody has room for improvement. Everybody has communication issues that need to be worked out. It is not a sign of weakness to go to therapy, not for a married couple, not for an individual. It's a sign that you want to take your marriage or your life to the next level. You want to be a better version of yourself, or you want to have a better marriage. But just because you're in therapy does not mean that your marriage is going to be saved. And there's only so much you can do. And you need to, if you've tried and you're just not happy, you're not satisfied, your marriage is an impediment to your happiness. I like to put it like this: if you were to get a Grammy, or one of the different awards tomorrow, and you could say whatever you wanted, whatever's in your heart, are you going to thank your spouse because you could not have made it here without them? Or are you going to say, I made it here in spite of you holding me back? And if it's the latter, it's definitely a sign that that you might need to move on and do it, because you have to. Like, a bad, lonely marriage is no way to live your life. The healing starts when you move on, and you owe it to yourself. And frankly, I know that it's not popular to say it, I think divorce, even though it's hard on the children, is better for the children in the long run, because if it's a bad marriage, because they need 2 whole parents. They need parents who aren't broken and miserable. The children deserve to see the parents in healthy relationships. They deserve to see the parents happy and fulfilled and not lonely. You can be a better parent once you take away the things in your life that are holding you back from being a better person.
Wow, beautiful. Well, thank you for coming on. This was great.
Yeah,
We
thank
really
you,
appreciate it.
Great to
A
meet
lot
you.
of insights, and I know it's definitely going to benefit our audience. I would like to thank everyone for listening. This has been Too Dad to Quit. toodadtoquit.com, Too Dad to Quit on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube clips. And please reach out to us. We do want to share your story. We think everyone's story has something to share, something that will help someone. And we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.